My husband was cooking when his phone vibrated on the counter, screen lighting up like a small, rude confession. Garlic, butter, olive oil. The holy trinity of a man who wanted to be seen as decent. The message said, "I miss your hands." Today was unbearable. No emojis, no jokes. The kind of sentence you don't send unless you've already crossed several invisible lines and feel entitled to keep going. I didn't gasp, I didn't freeze. I took a sip of my wine and thought, so this is how it finally announces itself. I picked up his phone while he was busy coaxing onions into transparency, the way he'd coaxed me for years into believing I was imagining things. I typed back with my thumbs, calm as a woman ordering dessert. "Dinner's almost ready. Come over." I placed the phone back exactly where it had been, face down, like a polite corpse. Then I watched him cook. That's the part people never believe later, that the first thing I felt wasn't heartbreak. It was clarity. Clean. Almost refreshing. Like taking off glasses you didn't know were dirty. He stirred. He hummed. He asked if I wanted more pepper. I was 60 years old, standing in my own kitchen, realizing that the man I'd shared a mortgage, a last name, and 3 decades of small compromises with had been rehearsing another life in his lunch breaks. And somehow, miraculously, I was not screaming. I was taking notes. The onions were browning too fast. I told him so. He adjusted the heat. We were excellent at this choreography, him making things look right at the last second, me pretending not to notice how close they'd come to burning. I wondered briefly how long he'd been touching her hands, whether she knew he hated rings while cooking, whether she thought that made her special. I set the table for 2, then paused. No, I thought. Let's not lie to ourselves tonight. I took out a 3rd plate. "Are we having guests?" he asked, not turning around. "Sort of," I said. My voice surprised me. It sounded light, almost amused. He smiled at that. The kind of smile men have when they believe the world is still arranged for their convenience, when they think women over 50 are furniture, useful, familiar, unlikely to move on their own. I carried the plates to the dining table, my knees steady, my hands not shaking at all. Somewhere between the wine glass and the cutlery drawer, I realized something important. I wasn't about to catch him. I was about to let him arrive. The phone buzzed again. He didn't hear it over the sizzle of onions. But I did. The thing about betrayal, real betrayal, the kind that doesn't bother dressing up as a misunderstanding, is that it expects a reaction. Loud ones. Tears. Questions that end with question marks instead of conclusions. I offered it none of that. I leaned against the counter and watched my husband cook like a man, auditioning for forgiveness he didn't know he'd need yet. He wiped his hands on a dish towel. He tasted the sauce. He frowned thoughtfully, as if the biggest risk in his life at that moment was undersalting. "You okay?" he asked. "Great," I said, which was technically true. I had never seen my life more clearly. I studied him the way women my age study wine labels. Slowly, skeptically, aware that most promises are decorative. The familiar curve of his shoulders. The way he stood a little straighter when he thought he was being admired. He had no idea he was being assessed for damage control. I realized something mildly hilarious then. He still thought he was ahead of me. Men often do. They confuse silence with ignorance, calm with stupidity. They think the absence of yelling is consent, or worse, resignation. I poured myself another glass of wine. This one tasted better. Knowledge has a way of improving the flavor of things. "You didn't answer," he said. "Are you sure you're okay?" "I'm just enjoying the evening," I replied. "Should I not be?" He smiled, relieved. That smile. The one that said, "Good. She's still manageable." I almost laughed. For years I had been manageable. I managed his moods, his ambitions, his mother's passive-aggressive Christmas cards. I managed to stay thin enough, pleasant enough, quiet enough. I managed my expectations until they fit neatly into the margins of his life. What I had never managed was my own disappearance. There's a particular cruelty in being told you're imagining things when you're not. It teaches you to doubt the only instrument you truly own, your perception. I'd been gaslit so gently, I'd mistaken it for warmth. I remembered every time I'd said, "Maybe it's just me," when it wasn't. Every time I apologized for being too much, when I was simply paying attention. I looked at the clock. 40 minutes. Enough time for her to shower, to choose something that said effortless, to rehearse a version of herself that believed she was special, not supplemental. I felt an unexpected flicker of pity. Not enough to intervene, just enough to recognize the pattern. Women rarely enter these situations thinking they're villains. They think they're exceptions. I checked my phone. No new messages. Good. Anticipation sharpens the truth. My husband plated the food with care. Like presentation could still save the substance. He set the table, kissed my cheek, completely unaware that this was the last time I would play my part without improvisation. "You seem lighter," he said. "I am," I answered honestly. "I stopped carrying something." He didn't ask what. Men never do when they think the answer might inconvenience them. I took my seat at the table and folded my napkin, my hands steady, my pulse calm. Somewhere between the clink of silverware and the low hum of the kitchen lights, it became clear. I wasn't planning revenge. I was planning accuracy. And accuracy, I'd learned, hurts far more than anger ever could. The doorbell hadn't rung yet, but it would. I used to think being called too much was a personality flaw, like bad posture, something I could fix if I tried harder, spoke softer, smiled on cue. Now I understand it was simply a diagnosis given to women who notice patterns. The first time he said it, we were in a parking lot. I'd asked, politely I thought, why he always took calls outside. He laughed, leaned against the car and said, "God, you're being too much. It's just work." Work, the universal solvent, dissolves suspicion, accountability, and sometimes marriages. After that, the phrase evolved. "You're overthinking, you're sensitive. Why do you always assume the worst?" I learned to nod, to downgrade my instincts from facts to feelings, to file my certainty under emotional clutter. If I were a better wife, I told myself, I wouldn't notice these things. I would be lighter, easier, less present. There's a special humiliation in realizing you've been slowly edited out of your own life. Not erased, just cropped. My opinions trimmed for length. My needs reduced to footnotes. My anger labeled tone. And the funny thing? I helped. I laughed when his colleagues mistook me for his assistant at company dinners. I made jokes about it first, because that way it hurt less. I became fluent in self-deprecation, a language women learn when they sense their value is negotiable. "Oh, I'm just the wife," I'd say, smiling brightly, as if I'd chosen the role for its low expectations. The laughter always landed. Mine stayed suspended. I remembered a dinner years ago, another kitchen, another version of me. He'd come home late, smelling faintly of perfume that wasn't mine. I'd said nothing. Instead, I asked if he wanted dessert. That night, he told me I was easy to be married to. At the time, I took it as a compliment. Now I hear it for what it was. A review. 5 stars for compliance. I glanced at the clock again. 25 minutes. Funny how time stretches when you stop lying to yourself. Every second felt dense, weighted with memories I'd been storing, like boxes labeled "Do not open unless necessary." I opened them all. The holidays where his family praised him for putting up with me. The therapy session where he said I was hard to read while I was sitting right there, reading him perfectly. The countless apologies I issued for reactions to situations he created. If apologies were currency, I could have retired early. I laughed out loud then, just once. It startled him. "What?" he asked. "Nothing," I said. "I was just thinking about how much energy I spent trying not to be inconvenient." He chuckled, relieved again. He always mistook my realizations for moods. That was his mistake, because something had shifted. Quietly, irreversibly. I no longer wanted him to understand me. I no longer needed validation from the person who'd benefited most from my confusion. I stood up and cleared a plate that hadn't been used yet. The extra one. My hand hovered for a moment, then I put it back. No, let it stay. This wasn't a reckoning fueled by rage, it was an audit, and audits don't scream, they simply reveal where everything went. The doorbell was still silent, but the house felt louder than it had in years. I didn't storm out of the kitchen. I didn't dramatically retreat to the bedroom like women in movies who need a soft place to collapse. I stayed exactly where I was because power, real power, rarely announces itself by leaving the room. I wiped the counter. Slowly, deliberately. The kind of cleaning you do when you're not trying to clean, just buy yourself time without looking suspicious. My phone lay face up beside my wine glass. It felt heavier than usual, as if it knew it was about to be promoted from accessory to weapon. I scrolled past group chats, spam emails, a dentist reminder I'd been postponing since Obama's second term. Then I found her name. Marianne. My husband's colleague. Older than both of us. Sharp in the quiet way. The kind of woman men underestimated because she never fought for attention, she collected leverage instead. They called her difficult at work, which usually meant she remembered things accurately. I hadn't spoken to her socially in years. We shared exactly 3 lunches over 2 decades, all of them painfully polite. But politeness is a language, so is restraint. Women like us recognize each other eventually. I typed one sentence. Are you still documenting everything? I didn't explain. I didn't apologize. I didn't add an emoji to soften the blow, which already told me how serious I was. The typing bubble appeared almost immediately, then disappeared, then reappeared. I smiled despite myself. That tiny pause was funnier than any joke. It meant she was checking something, or remembering everything at once. Her reply came 30 seconds later. Always. That was it. No punctuation drama, no curiosity, just a confirmation, like a safety clicking off. I set my phone down and exhaled, not in relief, in recognition. Behind me, my husband cleared his throat. Who were you texting? A colleague, I said easily. He nodded, satisfied. It never occurred to him that I, too, might have colleagues, or alliances, or a life that extended beyond his line of sight. That assumption had aged poorly. I poured myself more wine. The bottle was nearly empty now, which felt symbolic without being sentimental. I considered opening a second one, then decided against it. I wanted to remember this evening with surgical precision. You're quiet, he said. I'm listening, I replied. He laughed, the unguarded kind. Since when? I didn't answer. Instead, I looked around the kitchen, the remodel we'd argued about for months, the backsplash he'd chosen because it was neutral, the appliances we'd bought to impress people who never came over. It occurred to me that this room had seen every version of me except the most honest one. That version had just arrived. My phone buzzed again, a new message from Marianne. If tonight is what I think it is, she wrote, don't improvise. Let him follow his script. I nearly choked on my wine. Not from shock, from appreciation. There is a very specific kind of humor that only appears when someone understands your situation perfectly, without you having to narrate your pain like a performance review. I typed back, I wasn't planning to interrupt. 3 dots. Then, good, she replied. Men hate silence when it's informed. I locked my phone. Across the room, my husband plated the food, still humming, still convinced he was the most interesting thing happening tonight. I adjusted the third place setting at the table, just slightly, enough to be noticed later. This was no longer about confrontation, it was about timing. And finally, I wasn't doing this alone. The doorbell rang exactly 7 minutes later, not a polite ring, not a tentative one, a confident press, the kind that assumes it belongs. My husband flinched, just slightly, a microsecond of panic leaking through muscle memory. He recovered fast, of course, men like him always do. He wiped his hands, glanced at me, smiled. I'll get it, he said. No, I replied, already standing. I will. That surprised him. Small things often did lately. I walked to the door without rushing, without rehearsing. I was aware of my posture, my age, the faint ache in my left knee that flared when it rained. I opened the door as myself. Not the version designed to be digestible. She stood there holding a bottle of wine she'd clearly chosen last minute. Dressed well, but not too well. Hair intentional, makeup pretending not to be. She smiled before her eyes adjusted to the light. Then she saw me. Her smile stalled, recalibrated, then landed somewhere between apology and confusion. I could almost hear the internal math. Oh, she said. Hi. Hello, I replied. You must be exhausted, come in. She hesitated, just long enough to be interesting. Behind me, my husband had gone very still. Silence poured into the hallway like smoke. She began. Dinner's ready, I said pleasantly. You came all this way. That did it. Politeness is a powerful trap. She stepped inside because social conditioning told her it would be ruder not to. I closed the door. Up close, she looked younger than I'd imagined. Not in a threatening way, in a provisional one. Like someone still waiting to be chosen by something bigger than herself. She tried again, turning toward him. Oh, I know who you are, I said lightly. You work with my husband. Her eyes flicked to his face. He said nothing. Cowardice often masquerades as shock. I took the wine from her hand, examined the label. Good choice. Bold, slightly inappropriate for a first meeting, but we're clearly past traditional etiquette. That earned me a blink, and then a laugh. Short, nervous, reflexive. I'm sorry, she said too quickly. This is awkward. Yes, I agreed. But only for you two. We walked into the dining room together. I gestured to the table. 3 place settings. Candles lit. No chaos, no raised voices. Just intention. She sat when I pulled out the chair for her. Gratitude is another reflex women are trained into. My husband finally found his voice. This isn't. Please, I said. Let's eat while the food's warm. Cold meals make people lie. That shut him up. She stared at her plate like it might explode. I noticed then how carefully she avoided my eyes, how she kept glancing at him for cues that weren't coming. She'd expected secrecy, maybe guilt, possibly drama. She hadn't expected management. So, I said, cutting into my food. How long have you missed his hands? Her fork froze midair. What? I read the message, I clarified. You're very articulate when you're longing. Her face drained of color. My husband made a sound that suggested his internal organs were reorganizing. That's private, she whispered. I smiled. So was my marriage. She looked at him then, really looked, waiting for rescue. None came. In that moment, I understood something with startling clarity. She wasn't my enemy. She was the proof. And proof doesn't need to be punished, it needs to be presented. I lifted my glass. To honesty, I said. It's unfashionable, but efficient. The candles flickered. The room felt unbearably calm. Somewhere in the silence, something began to crack. The knock came from the back door. Not the front, not dramatic. 3 measured taps. Professional. Almost courteous. My husband turned pale so fast I worried about his blood pressure. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, like a man realizing the fire exit leads directly into the flames. I'll get that, I said, already standing. Of course I would. Marianne stepped inside wearing a beige trench coat and the expression of someone who had never once mistaken facts for feelings. She looked around the kitchen, the table, the candles, the 3 of us frozen in various stages of exposure. Well, she said mildly, this explains the calendar inconsistencies. That landed harder than a slap. My husband straightened instinctively, slipping into work posture. Marianne, this isn't necessary, she finished. No, it's already overdue. She took off her coat, folded it carefully, and draped it over a chair like she planned to stay long enough for coffee. Then she nodded politely at the other woman. You must be the consultant, Marianne said. The coworker blinked. I what? The one billing dinners as team alignment, Marianne continued, very forward-thinking. I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from smiling. Humor like that doesn't beg for laughter. It waits to be understood. Marianne turned to me. You don't mind if I sit? Please, I said. You're right on time. She took the empty seat, the one my husband had been avoiding, and placed her phone on the table, screen down. Heavy, confident, like a paperweight for reality. I'll keep this brief, she said, folding her hands. I'm retiring in 6 weeks, which means I no longer have to pretend certain patterns are coincidences. My husband tried to laugh. You're being dramatic. She raised an eyebrow. I've been documenting expense reports since 2009. I don't do drama, I do timelines. The coworker's face had gone completely still now. The kind of stillness that suggests the body has stopped consulting the brain. Marianne looked at her again, almost kindly. You should know. You're not the first. Just the first who walked into a wife's dining room. Silence thickened. I felt something unexpected then. Not triumph. Not rage. Relief. The kind you feel when someone else finally says the quiet part out loud so you don't have to keep holding it in your chest. My husband leaned forward. What do you want? Marianne smiled faintly. Nothing. That's the beauty of timing. I already said what I needed to send. What? He said. HR, she replied. And legal. Don't worry, I was very clear, very factual. I even included screenshots. She turned to me. I hope you don't mind. I used your Wi-Fi. I laughed. I couldn't help it. It slipped out of me like air from a punctured balloon. No, I said. That's what it's for. My husband's hands were shaking now. The coworker pushed her chair back as if distance might help. This isn't fair, he said. Marianne stood, smoothing her sleeve. Neither is rewriting reality and calling it leadership. She picked up her coat and looked at me. You did well. You didn't interrupt the process. Thank you, I said. I learned from the best. As she walked toward the door, she paused. One more thing, she said to him. Next time you think silence means safety, remember tonight. The door closed behind her. No one spoke. The candles burned steadily, indifferent to hierarchy. And for the first time all evening, my husband looked like a man who understood. He was no longer in control of the narrative. The thing about gaslighting is that it depends on an audience. One person, isolated, doubting herself, willing to keep the peace. Once the audience leaves, the trick looks embarrassingly simple. My husband tried anyway. "This is being blown out of proportion," he said, palms open, voice softening into the tone he used when explaining things to waiters and me. "We were just talking. People misinterpret things." I waited. Silence has a way of encouraging men to keep digging. The coworker nodded too quickly. "Yes, we didn't do anything wrong. We were just close." Close. The word people use when they want intimacy without accountability. "I told you," he continued, turning to me now, "you've always had a tendency to catastrophize." There it was. Familiar. Comfortable. His favorite tool. I looked at him and felt nothing. No sting, no doubt, just a mild curiosity, like watching someone insist the stove isn't hot while his hand is still smoking. "You're overreacting," he added gently. "This doesn't have to turn into something ugly." Ugly. As if truth were the one lacking manners. I took a sip of wine and nodded. "You're right." Both of them exhaled. "Hope is a dangerous thing." "I do tend to overreact," I continued. "Remember when I thought you were lying about the business trip in Denver?" He stiffened. "And Chicago," I added. "And the conference that didn't exist in San Diego." The coworker's head snapped toward him. "What conference?" He shot me a warning look. "Too late." "I kept spreadsheets," I said, almost apologetically. I thought it might help me calm down. That earned a small laugh from her. Nervous, disbelieving. "You see," he said quickly. "This is what I mean. She fixates." I smiled. I color-coded them. Silence. I reached for my phone and slid it across the table. Not aggressively. Casually. Like returning a borrowed pen. On the screen, dates, locations, receipts. A pattern so neat it bordered on art. He stared at it, then at me. "You went through my things?" "I lived with you for 32 years, I said. "That's not snooping, that's proximity." The coworker stood abruptly. "You told me you were separated." He opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. "It was complicated." "That's what people say when they want sympathy instead of permission," I said. He turned back to me, panic rising now. "You're doing this to punish me." I tilted my head. "No, I'm doing this to stop apologizing for being right." His voice sharpened. "You're trying to make me look like a villain." I considered that. "You're doing a fine job on your own." He reached for my hand. I pulled it back. "Don't," I said calmly. "That gesture is retired." The coworker looked between us, realization settling in. "You let me walk in here." "Yes," I said. "I wanted you to hear the lies in stereo." She laughed then. A short, cracked sound. Unbelievable. She grabbed her bag. "I'm leaving." "No," he said, too fast. "Wait." She didn't. The door closed behind her with a soft, definitive click. My husband sagged into his chair. The performance was over. No more mirrors to hide behind. "This isn't who I am," he said weakly. I stood and cleared the plates. The clink of porcelain felt ceremonial. "It is," I replied. "You just preferred me blurry." He watched me move around the kitchen, a man suddenly unsure of the physics of his own house. For the first time, he wasn't asking me to believe him. He was asking me to save him. I didn't. Consequences are rarely loud. That's the lie movies tell. In real life, they arrive quietly like certified mail. No yelling, just signatures and dates you can't undo. The morning after, my husband woke up early, showered too long, and dressed as if he still had somewhere important to be. Habit is stubborn that way. It clings even after relevance expires. He stood in the doorway holding his phone, scrolling, refreshing, waiting for something that refused to arrive. "No emails," he said. "That's good, right?" I buttered my toast. "It's early." He nodded, clinging to the possibility that silence meant mercy. It used to work with me. By noon, it stopped working with everyone else. First came the calendar invites, meetings he wasn't invited to, then a short message from HR, polite enough to be lethal, no accusations, just questions. Very specific ones, the kind that already know the answers. He paced, he talked too fast, he tried humor. "They're overreacting," he said. "This is just optics." Optics. Another word men use when reality makes them uncomfortable. I watched him unravel, the way you watch weather move in. Inevitable, indifferent to pleading. His phone buzzed again. This time he didn't read it out loud. He didn't have to. I could tell by the way his shoulders collapsed like a tent with one pole removed. They're putting me on leave, he said. Temporarily. I nodded. That sounds responsible. He stared at me. You're enjoying this? No, I said honestly, I'm observing it. There's a difference. By evening, the narrative he'd relied on for decades, that he was a good man who made small, forgivable mistakes, had nowhere left to stand. Good men, apparently, did not expense hotel rooms for team alignment. They did not lie with such consistency that spreadsheets became necessary. He tried one last angle. What about us? He asked. 32 years has to count for something. It does, I said. It counts as experience. That made him flinch. I called a lawyer the next day. A woman with a calm voice and a reputation for not being impressed by charm. We spoke for 20 minutes. I felt lighter with every sentence. When I hung up, he was watching me like a stranger who'd just changed the locks. You planned this, he said. No, I replied. I survived it. There's a difference. The house shifted after that. Not physically, energetically. He moved through rooms like a guest overstaying his welcome. Every object that had once felt shared now felt documented. Even the kitchen looked different, less like a stage, more like a workplace that had failed an inspection. He stopped cooking. That surprised me more than the emails. A week later, a mutual friend called. Her voice was cautious, rehearsed. I heard things, she said. I hope you're okay. I am, I replied, and meant it. Because here's the thing, no one tells you about the aftermath of betrayal. Once the lies stop working, the noise dies down. What's left is space. And space, it turns out, is generous. That night, I slept through the dark without waking once. No phone buzzing, no questions, no doubt, just quiet. And for the first time in years, quiet didn't feel like absence. It felt like mine. Recovery didn't look like yoga retreats or inspirational quotes taped to the fridge. It looked like paperwork, folders, password changes, the unglamorous choreography of a woman reclaiming her life one practical step at a time. I started with my name. Not legally, at least not yet, just socially. I stopped introducing myself as his anything. At appointments, at cafes, on the phone. I corrected people gently when they assumed. You'd be surprised how often women disappear behind possessive pronouns. Oh, you're Mark's wife, a neighbor said, smiling too brightly. I'm Eleanor, I replied. Same smile, firmer edges. The lawyer moved efficiently. She asked questions without pity, which I appreciated. Pity slows things down. Clarity accelerates them. We talked assets, timelines, the house. I listened, took notes, nodded. I felt like a student finally enrolled in a class I'd been auditing for years. At home, my husband floated. He tried politeness like a new dialect. He cleaned things that didn't need cleaning. He cooked once, then abandoned the pan halfway through, as if he itself had betrayed him. I let him be awkward. It wasn't my job anymore to smooth transitions. Friends reacted in predictable categories. Some were supportive, some were shocked in a way that centered their own fear. A few went silent. Those were the ones who'd built their marriages on similar compromises and didn't want to check the math. I didn't chase any of them. Instead, I took myself to a cafe on a Tuesday morning and sat alone by the window. I ordered coffee I liked, not the kind we used to compromise on. Bitter, honest, no phone pretending to be something else. I watched people pass. A woman my age laughed into her phone, unapologetic. A man tripped over a curb and pretended he hadn't. Life continued without consulting my past. It was oddly comforting. I started sleeping better. Not perfectly, but better. When I woke at night, it wasn't with dread, it was with lists. Things to do, things to keep, things to let go. I kept the bookshelf, the blue chair, the habit of reading before bed. I let go of explanations. One afternoon, I found a box in the garage labeled MISC. Inside were old photos, ticket stubs, a watch he'd given me years ago because he thought I needed something nice. I held it for a moment, then put it back. Objects, like people, reveal their value over time. He asked me once, quietly, "Are you happier?" I thought about it, about the silence, the space, the way my shoulders no longer lived near my ears. "I'm clearer," I said. "Happiness might come later." He nodded, as if clarity were a weather condition he hoped would pass. It wouldn't. The last thing I did that week was open a new email account. Simple, clean. My name, spelled correctly, no numbers. It felt ceremonial without being sentimental. I logged out of the old one, closed the laptop, and for the first time since the onions browned too fast in that kitchen, I felt something settle. Not joy, not triumph, but ownership of my time. My narrative. My name. The day I moved out, it rained the kind of rain that doesn't argue. No thunder. No drama. Just a steady, patient fall, as if the sky understood timing better than most people. I didn't take much. Clothes, books, the blue chair. Objects that had earned their place by not asking me to be smaller around them. He stood in the doorway while I carried boxes to the car, not blocking, not helping, just present in the way men are when they've run out of language and hope posture will do the rest. "You don't have to go like this," he said. I paused, box in hand. "This is the most honest way I know." He nodded, because nodding was easier than admitting that honesty had never been his strong suit. My new apartment was smaller, quieter. It smelled like fresh paint and possibility, which I realize sounds sentimental, but after decades of managing other people's comfort, I was allowed one cliché. The first night, I ordered takeout and ate on the floor. No candles, no presentation, just food that tasted like it hadn't been staged. I slept better than I had in years. Weeks passed, then months. The legal parts concluded with the efficiency of professionals who had seen this story too many times to romanticize it. The settlement was fair, not generous. Fair felt like a luxury. I heard updates through the social grapevine. His leave became permanent. Marianne retired on schedule. The coworker transferred departments. Life rearranged itself without consulting my feelings. That was fine. My feelings were finally my own. On a Sunday morning, I made coffee in my small kitchen and watched light pool on the counter. No one criticized how strong it was. No one asked if I'd used too many beans. Silence, again, doing its good work. I thought about that night, the onions, the message, the third plate, how carefully I'd arranged the truth, and then stepped back. Revenge, I've learned, is overrated. It keeps you tethered. What I wanted wasn't payback. It was authorship. I wanted to be the one who decided how the story was told. Sometimes people ask if I miss him. I tell them the truth, which still surprises me. I miss who I thought I was allowed to be with him. I don't miss the work it took to stay that small. At 61, I don't need grand endings. I need mornings that belong to me. Evenings that don't require vigilance. A life where my intuition isn't treated like a flaw. I still cook, just not for applause. I let the onions brown the way they want to now, and when my phone buzzes, it's usually a friend, or a calendar reminder, or nothing at all. That, it turns out, is my favorite sound. Quiet. A year later, I realized something quietly radical. I no longer replayed that night. Not the onions, not the message, not the way my hands didn't shake when they should have. The memory had stopped asking for attention. It had done its job. My life now is smaller in square footage and larger in air. Mornings arrive without negotiations. I drink my coffee on the balcony of my apartment, watching a neighbor's dog refuse to walk in the rain, stubborn and unbothered. I admire that kind of confidence. Sometimes I catch myself humming while I cook. No audience, no expectation, just sound filling space because it can. People ask if I'm lonely. I tell them the truth again. Loneliness is loud. What I have is quiet. They are not the same thing. I started volunteering twice a week at a local literacy center. Nothing heroic. Just chairs, fluorescent lights, adults learning to read contracts and medication labels without fear. When they get it right, their faces soften the way mine did when I stopped doubting myself. Recognition is contagious. On Fridays, I meet a friend for dinner. We sit by the window, splitting dessert because we want to, not because someone once told us it was sensible. We talk about books, not men. Time passes without urgency. Occasionally, someone new shows interest. I notice it the way I notice weather now, without obligation to prepare for a storm. If something grows, it will grow without shrinking me. I don't hate my ex-husband. Hate requires proximity. What I feel is distance, and distance has been generous. The strange gift he gave me without meaning to was this. He forced me to choose myself without apology. At this age, healing doesn't look like fireworks. It looks like alignment. I trust my instincts. I take up my own space. I let silence be kind. And when the evening settles in, I close my windows, turn off the lights, and think, sometimes with a small smile, some endings don't break you, they return you.